we are ready to hop into Game 2. This is Team Substitute versus GULCH TROTTERS, Team 4 versus Team 5 in the time trials for this region, both representing A and Z, and it's going to be an interesting one. This should theoretically be even closer than the last series, but I'm not sure if that's possible as we head back to More of Souls.
And Gurren, you and I were talking about this pre-cast today, about how there's only so many variations of the pulls you can do in this dungeon. Oftentimes, I mean, you're just going to pull everything with Imran, you're going to pull everything almost up to Harboron, and then Harboron, you're going to do the whole boat, oftentimes with Skjall and then Helia. So I'm expecting out of both teams right away to see a similar pull here right into Imran.
Yeah, so they're pulling all the trash with the bus. Some of the trash actually could be skipped if you don't pull the bus right away, but it's a lot faster and it also gives you a lot more resets. Especially, oh, we see one death here right away from Team GULCH, and they got the rest up immediately though, so they shouldn't fall too far behind. That's
5 seconds already on the board for them, but it is worth noting, you know, I was actually just about to say it once you were done talking that, you know, I really liked how they kind of pre-bought Death coming over for Team Substitute as well, Team Substitute in the meantime as well. But, you know, I did like how they pre-bopped their Monk over on GULCH TROTTER's side, because there's a lot of splash residual damage that goes out onto the melee, as you pointed out earlier before this match, how dangerous it is to carry extra melee. But unfortunately, he just stood in the Swordless for the fire, which of course Blessing of Protection does not save you from. Nonetheless, both teams have now stabilized, and Imran already sub 50% for GULCH TROTTERS, whilst in the meantime, Team Substitute still working to get to that 50% mark.
Yeah, especially Maw of Souls, a very dangerous dungeon for double melee. There's a lot of cleave going on, a lot of things going on. We see the Moonkin, unfortunately, on GULCH TROTTERS, not pulling too much DPS, but he's up there. He's close to the Windwalker, and as we all know, Windwalker can pull insane amounts of damage, so he's doing well so far.
You know, and we saw in the last map too, I mean, that AoE saw as the solar beam that comes down from the boom can really be useful in some of the later maps, and even in the trash after Harboron with a lot of the interrupts that need to be done, so I'm sure there will be a nice advantage for them there. GULCH TROTTERS is absolutely destroying Imran on damage right now. I mean, Team Substitute is just really falling behind on that single target.
Yeah, it's also interesting to note that none of the teams so far had a rogue. Rogues are very, very good at pulling that single target damage, while the other two classes come and do the whole AoE damage. So the single target damage is a little bit lower without the rogue, but GULCH TROTTERS are advancing already to the boat, and Team Substitute, Team Substitute is on their way too.
GULCH TROTTERS, of course, blow the Horn of Gondor. In the meantime, we do see the Blood DK here using that Sky Step, rounding up this dangerous pull that we always, you know, try to point out. There is a lot of splash damage, including quaking, going on in a very confined space. They actually pull the dogs on top of it too, so this is a really big pull going on right now. Tons of area denial coming up, of course, from a lot of those Swift Blades as well. We have the Defiant Strikes going out. We have a lot of the Mutt going out. We have the barrels going out. We have, I mean, we have the quaking going out too, so these players are really restricted in terms of their space, and one slip up is going to cause a wipe here.
Yeah, we can see insane damage coming out of the Monk here from Team GULCH TROTTERS. Sometimes teams do different pulls in the boat here. In total, in the whole dungeon in Maw of Souls, we saw some teams only doing 3 or 4 big pulls. We see the Monk actually dropping really, really low on this pull here.
GULCH TROTTERS stabilizing now, and they're slowly kiting around the area. Now, if one of them does happen to fall here, they can release right here at the cages. There's a checkpoint right there, but, you know, best off not to be in that scenario. The Mariner, as we can see in the background there, is starting to now patrol away from this area. We'll likely see both of these teams doing that typical pull where they grab the Giant plus the Mariner, pull it off to the side so the rest of the group can safely go up to the top, because the Mariner is an absolute nightmare to deal with in the meantime. Here we do indeed see that Sky Step come out of the Blood DK as they safely move it over to the side so that the remaining 4 members can appreciate the sacrifice, of course, and run upstairs and pop a res on that DK.
Yeah, neither team has a hunter to do the skip or a rogue to do the skip, so they actually have to sacrifice their tank, which does cost a little bit of time, because obviously you need to wait for this mass rest to come through. Also, you need to see they need to wait for the quaking that interrupts the mass rest, so they're a little bit slower here.
Oh, we do have a few deaths come over from Team Substitute in the meantime. I think they've managed to actually
did a different skip.
The skip, yeah, it was a bit sloppier though. I mean, they certainly didn't need to lose 2 members from that. Nonetheless, they do get the reses going now, and we'll pull the same 2 champion pack. In the meantime, GULCH TROTTERS now pulling up all the way to Harboron's room. In just a moment, they'll be pulling Harboron. But, you know, this is kind of dangerous. We have seen this fail in the China week, because now they have to keep an eye on both of the champions for interrupts. They have to keep an eye on the servitor that Harboron spawns for that interrupt as well. And any slip up there is going to cause a wipe in this scenario.
Yeah, it's also a lot of damage on the tank, and as you said, a lot of interrupts, especially for Team Substitute, as they have 2 range DPS. And as we all know, range DPS have a longer cooldown on their interrupts as melee do. So they might have 1 cast going through, and that means pretty much wipe.
Pretty much a wipe. First servitor indeed spawns over for Team Substitute right now. Substitute name has been changed to Substitute at the bottom to avoid any confusion when we're talking about the teams, of course, for those at home. The champions being well handled on both sides in the meantime. Mage dropping quite low in the meantime. Does pop that Ice Block at 2% or so health. Luckily manages to hang on. They do finish off all of the mobs. Some of the champions remaining still, but they're DPSing them down. GULCH TROTTERS, of course, dealing with their last remaining champion and doing well to stabilize and DPS Harboron. Again, more than 10% ahead of Team Substitute.
We can see here the Team GULCH TROTTERS, the Moonkin is actually doing a lot of damage. Who would have thought?
I don't know. Go tell someone else. I don't care. No, I'm just kidding.
So we do have a fortified quaking and bursting, as we can see. The ads that die also apply bursting. As if you pull the trash to the boss, of course the ads that spawn during a boss fight don't actually apply bursting, but they also have to be careful with the quaking, especially as they dodge the scythe from the boss coming out, the cosmic scythe. You gotta be careful as well, and all the swirlies on the ground, to not kill each other with the quaking or get hit by anything else.
Yeah, so it is important kind of to drag the boss around this area, as you were alluding to, because that nether rip is a lot of area denial. It randomly spawns near players quite frequently as well. Now, you can never have more than 3 rounds of nether rip at any one time, but you certainly don't want to get trapped in a corner, especially because if one of the ranged, such as the Boomkin, is lagging by themselves in the distance, they can pop the servitor by accident way far from the group, or be stunned by the mobs and spawn the mobs way far from the group, which causes everyone to have to run through that area denial. So both teams doing really well to stick together. Now GULCH TROTTERS about to kill Harboron here, and I expect we'll see a very big pill on the boat, where probably that solar beam is going to be really useful, Nagura.
Yeah, we can see them pop the sky step and charge into this mob group here. I think they're not going to pull the mini boss, as it is very difficult to pull the mini boss on top of this group. It does a lot of damage to the tank. You need perfect stance and AoE silence. As you mentioned, the solar beam is very, very good for this pull, as they stand in the beam and are silenced for a very long time. The tank has to kite at some point because it's just too much damage to handle at some point.
Although on Free Marcy's side, we actually saw that they killed the mobs so quickly that the tank was safe, but indeed, as you alluded to, the Blood DK starting to now kite for GULCH TROTTERS as they finish up the remaining mobs here in the meantime, trying to stabilize with that massive amount of bursting damage coming up on the teams right now. They do have 3 mobs left, so they seem to be stabilized. No deaths. Actually, no, they did have 1 death over. A few deaths for Team Substitute as well, as the tank goes down on Team Substitute now. They do well, of course, to immediately pull the mobs back to Harboron's deck, as over there is where the new checkpoint is, so the tank can immediately release and try to pick up some of this pressure.
Thankfully, they do have a Warlock with the slow ring, so when the tank dies, they actually have an easy time kiting. We see the healer die as well. Also, not only is it a big pull and it's very difficult to deal with all the interrupts and the CC going on and the big tank damage, but they also, it is bursting, right? So as the mobs die, it's also a lot of AoE damage on the group going on, so it's hard to deal with.
Right, you are. Team Substitute now stabilizing. GULCH TROTTERS having already pulled Skjall and all of his skeletons over there on the side. Now, this is the last mob worth 8% worth of trash that they need to kill. Once they do this, the fog wall will dissipate and they will have access to Hotaya, the last boss. GULCH TROTTERS looking in quite a solid position right now. Another 3 deaths taxed up for Team Substitute, slowly capsizing on that side. In the meantime, Skjall looking nice and stable, making sure they're getting their interrupts on him and getting ready for Hotaya soon.
Yeah, so we can see both teams actually saved their Bloodlust for this pull here, as they didn't use it at the start, because the match that we saw beforehand, both teams used it at the start and then they had it ready again for the very, very end of Hotaya fight, but both teams here are saving it for the big pull.
Yeah, so perhaps they're opting that their overall time in Maw for will be maybe sub 10 minutes, sub 11 minutes, so that they wouldn't have access to both of those heroisms, or Bloodlust in this case. We'll have to see how their time ends up in the end. Hotaya now just spawning for GULCH TROTTERS, after soon they will pull her first phase, where they will need to kill a combination of any 6 tentacles that spawn on the ship. They always start with 1 Destructor in the middle and 2 graspings, which is prime time cleave, and this is actually probably a really good phase for Boomkin.
Yeah, Moonkin very, very good here at this phase. It also depends a little bit on the RNG that happens here with the Distractor Tentacle, as the second and the third can be random spawn. If it spawns in the front where the very first one is, then it's very, very good for a lot of classes, as they can cleave on like 2 or even 3 tentacles at the same time. But we see they're actually doing really well so far, and they did get the Distractor in the back, unfortunately.
They do head over and DPS it, but you know, the Boomkin having a field day right now, able to kind of multi-dot everything and keep an eye, doing well to move left and right on the ship accordingly, making sure that they don't get hit by Helia's evil spray of doom. In the meantime, also Dispel's going down properly, avoiding all the swirlies. Now, once they do complete the 6 tentacles, which they will shortly here in just a moment, I believe these are the last 2 graspings that they need, they will enter the second phase. We'll have a quick role-playing or RP session where Helia will kind of shatter the front of the ship, and we'll have access to the second phase for 1 minute at a time, and then Hotaya will will submerge for 20 seconds after that minute. Teams usually in this phase will look to pump out as much DPS as possible to try and kill her before she submerges, is to not waste that 20 seconds. But Nagura, that's going to be really hard to do without Bloodlust on either side.
Yeah, definitely going to be very hard to do, and their single target damage might not be that great, as I believe at least the Moon can use his cooldowns in the very first phase, so the damage in the second phase is going to be a lot lower.
What tells you that? is it that they're double the damage of the Windwalker at the moment?
We also have 2 Holy Paladins. What a surprise, also 2 Blood Decays. We haven't seen that one before. But they can do quite a bit of damage in the last phase if they have their wings ready. As we can see the Paladin here with his wings just hitting the bus.
Yeah, Blood Decay is likely running, of course, the Shoulders and Bracers combo for some of that max single target damage, or likely they could be running Cephas as well and try to get in on that interrupt rotation for Helia. That does require a 2-man interrupt rotation if we're including melee and tanks, as they have that lower 15-second CD on their interrupt, doing well to interrupt here. And of course, they have to avoid the 1/3 of the ship that she covers with her breath during this first phase. Otherwise, it's just a race to see which player can get Helia down to around 70.5%. That's when she will actually end the fight.
Yeah, so we see Team Substitute is actually quite a bit behind now. Not only are they behind in the boss fight, they also have 8 deaths, so 30 seconds behind in total. It's probably needs to be a wipe at the GULCH TROTTERS to lose this game at this point.
Yeah, I mean, there's also that 6-death differential indeed. Yes, Team Substitute right now looking like just like the ship as a nervous wreck indeed. Helia doing her breath along the middle of the ship there. I don't think, as we alluded to earlier, that they're going to get that one phase. She does look like she'll be going down. Indeed, she does. She submerges there. The players will just kind of have to avoid the tentacles and swirlies for the next 20 seconds. Once she re-emerges, they will have access to her and be able to kill her again for another minute.
Yeah, so if Substitute manages to one-phase Helia, which I don't think they will, but you never know, they might be able to catch up, but it's going to be very, very close.
That death differential is just kind of 30 seconds is a huge amount of time. That's beyond the amount of time that she submerges. So I think GULCH TROTTERS are going to have this one tied in the bag, and indeed they're rearing up to finish off Helia and take this series in a dominating 1-0 start.
Yep, GULCH TROTTERS trotting on in that first one. Good victory for them. And I do want to commend the observers for trying to find Helia's good side. But unfortunately, she seems equally menacing from every angle. So not quite enough there, but enough for GULCH TROTTERS to take her down. And once again, a convincing victory for them. Only a couple of deaths on the board. And hey, the Moonkin won.
Yep. Well, the Moonkin actually did really well. We saw the Moonkin do a lot of damage, especially in that last fight. Also in Harbor Run. Maw of Souls is probably one of the best dungeons for Moonkins because the cooldowns just work out perfectly for them. It is a 3-minute cooldown, which is usually the one thing that makes Moonkin not so good compared to other classes because it's just such a long time, while other classes only have like 1 or 2 minutes. So yeah, it works out for them.
Just one thing, that doesn't make them so good. As it were.
I mean, I just want to clarify for those at home that whilst, for those of you who don't know, I mean, I imagine that most of you do, that Jack is a disciplined priest. You may have realized that Nagura is a Moonkin. So we do like to throw these things over. As you can see, Sloot's beautiful face on the desk right now, his reaction. He's like a jack of all trades, plays all the tanks. We don't get to talk about them too much. Had a Demon Hunter in the last one.
That's the most exciting thing I've seen so far in a forest of blood DKs, unfortunately. Just so advantageous with that AoE group. I mean, it's hard to argue.
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. These teams, I mean, they are the best in the world, right? So they are going to have those min-maxing strategies and where the class has the advantage. So that's why it's interesting to see these different healers and DPS coming out especially. But hey, game 1 goes to GULCH TROTTERS. They take the Maw of Souls for the first time. Now of course, map choice and the affix, the third one will head over to Team Substitute to get that advantage. And I mean, again, pretty close series. Both the teams on the final boss at the same time, Sloot.
You know, close relatively, but I think that's just by virtue of the fact that this is a short map and there's a limited amount of pulls that you can really do. But this wasn't as close of a first game as we saw in the previous series. I mean, a lot of sloppiness, unfortunately, coming out from Team Substitute. 8 deaths on the board by the end of it, needing to, go defensive on that pull with Skjall and everything, and they just started falling behind well ahead of time, whereas BTS's falling point in the last series was just that one pull. They just took a bit too long defensively as well, but they didn't have as many deaths leading up to it, so hopefully Team Substitute can kind of get them recompose, get themselves together and clean up some of the sloppiness on that run.
Yeah, they're going to have to rally something as we do go into game 2. We are ready, of course, to let the teams have a little bit of time so they can decide that. Team Substitute definitely behind at this point as the GULCH TROTTERS take map 1 on Maw of Souls. They'll have to come up with a substitute map for this next one. They'll get the affix choice as well. This is, of course, the second regional weekend. We saw China. I think if you're Skyline D, you are quaking in your boots just a little bit. We've seen some fantastic stuff already coming out of Australia and Korea. We'll be back after this with the next series. We're all geared up for Game 2 of Gulch Trotters versus Team Substitute here. They've gone over to Vault of the Wardens is the map choice coming out of Team Substitute. And the affixes here are going to be Quaking, Fortified, and Volcanic. So Quaking being that third affix locked in. I am your host for the weekend, Healing Stat. And joining me once again, we do have Sloot and Nagura for this series. Some Moonkins, so definitely nice to have Nagura on the desk for that one. And interesting DPS compositions coming out throughout the weekend. But I do want to dive into this map. Quaking and Vault of the Wardens being the choice coming out of Team Substitute. Do you think there's any particular advantages for their composition on this map, Nagura?
I don't think so, especially because Quaking and Volcanic don't really do anything. Like, it's not too disruptive, and they also have 2 range DPS, so Quaking actually is more annoying for them because the other team only has 1 range, and as we all know, melees don't usually cast many spells, so Quaking is not going to interrupt them. The only thing that is a little bit annoying if you have a lot of melee is you actually need to spread out so you don't damage each other, so that's the only downside about it.
Yeah, and we can see the map choice confirmed here. Vault of the Wardens is locked in. This is our first map pool since at the start of the day. We make it a little bit easier for the teams, which means it's going to be plus 22. Still too difficult for me, I have to say, but for the other people on the desk, they're probably like laughing at this, seeing this. Is this something you do like on
I would never
time?
laugh. I would never laugh at you.
Thank you.
Ever.
But that's, my job is to laugh at you, right? Because that's where the jokes come in. Yes. But anyways, of course, we are going to be... there we go, he is laughing at me after all. But we are going to be hopping into Game 2 momentarily. Gulch Trotters up 1 in this one, and they're, of course, looking to go up against Free Marcy. Winner of this series will be advancing to meet the #1 seed. But what do we want to see from Team Substitute on their map choice, Sloot, so they can win? I mean, Vault of the Warden's obviously slightly longer map than More of Souls.
Yeah, slightly longer, and a lot of that trash, a lot of the danger in the dungeon for the trash is really front-loaded. I think you complete about 50-51% in that area, unless they opt to skip it, of course, leading up to that first boss. So a lot of it's really going to come down to how big the pool is at the start of the dungeon, how much they opt to do, how well they executed, of course. You know, they did have a bit of sloppy play coming up in that last map. 8 deaths on the board, so they're really going to need to tighten up a lot of those deaths.
Yeah, but I always used to like it when Wardens was one of my daily boxes, but in this instance, perhaps a little bit harder. Definitely got to be keeping your guard up if you're Team Substitute here, as we do ready to go into game number 2 of this series. Team Substitute down 1, need to win this to stay in the series, but not in the tournament. Of course, we're at double elimination, but Gulch Trotters looking very strong in map 1. We'll have to see if they can keep it up on the map choice from Team Substitute.
Well, as I said earlier, Nagura, we do have a lot of dangerous trash here, but again, you know, something that your Boomkin's Beam can handle really well. I mean, there are a lot of dangerous casters in this early pack, but the most dangerous of all of this trash coming up is actually Glavion, of course, the mini boss style mob coming up, which they do pull right away into the corner. You have to watch out really carefully for that, especially in a fortified setting. She does a ton of damage to the tank.
Yeah, we actually see both teams doing pretty similar pulls here. We saw in the China region last weekend that they actually had an insane pull, and we see both the teams actually popping Leblalas here and trying to get everything done.
No, actually, Gulch Trotters,
yes.
does not pop it. Yeah, that's what I was trying to get your attention on there. Team Substitute does opt to use that Bloodlust. Gulch Trotters does not, so they will have that available to them later on. Glavion, of course, now going down on health, almost down for Gulch Trotters. We do have a, I thought we had a death, almost a death actually.
Cauterized.
We have the Cauterized proc for the mage. Won't have that available for a while, of course. That is the Fire Mage's cheat death-like ability that saves them for getting that 5 seconds up on the board. Cleaning up the rest of the trash. Team Substitute making way to lead up to the remaining half of the trash of the first boss. There's a lot of trash leading up to the first boss, and unfortunately a death coming out of the Windwalker Monk now on Team Substitute.
Yeah, there's a lot of damage going on with the mini-boss pulsing AoE after the Metamorphosis. And there's also, I mean, you can, as we said earlier, Quaking is not too disruptive, but you can get some really unlucky timings with Quaking overlapping with some AoEs coming out. We actually see 1 death here at Gulch Trotters as well. The Demon Hunter is going down on this big pull there.
So the Gulch Trotters actually opt to use their battle res there for this big pull. I think wise to do so as well, because they just got everything into place as the Demon Hunter dies. Unfortunately, the Monk goes down as well. Will need to release, don't have that battle res available to them. Team Substitute now doing a slightly slower pull. They're actually looking, they actually skipped the 5-pack on the side there. They're dealing with the smallies, and will eventually do a similarly large pull to the Gulch Trotters right now, who are just opting to chew through. Unfortunately, they don't get the interrupt cast on the Fell Rage, which does a ton of damage to the group, and will likely end up in a white unless this tank can stay alive, but tons of deaths coming in for Gulch Trotters.
Yeah, so they actually pulled this pack that we saw. A lot of teams last weekend, they actually decided to skip this pack, as it is a very, very difficult pack, and it is fortified coming in, so a lot of casts going on, a lot of interrupts that need to be done. If you don't interrupt something, then as you wipe, as we can see here.
Where was the Moonkin on that one? Didn't help them that time. GULCH TROTTERS with a full wipe, needing to run back in the meantime, while Team Substitute now just dealing. Slow and steady wins the race here. They are dealing with that trash, do manage to finish it off, and of course they've started the RP for Tirathon, which is the first boss of the dungeon. Now, shouldn't be too difficult for them. This is a fortified setting. This boss does have 3 phases associated with it. One is at the start, just in kind of humanoid phase, after which we will enter the Vengeance Demon Hunter phase at around 70% or so, and of course the third phase at around 40%, where he goes into Havoc form and starts pulsing AoE damage on the group.
Yeah, so they also do in another phase where at spawn, we can see they have a Warlock. Sometimes a Warlock runs Sephu Secret and banishes one of the ads to get this Sephu's proccing, and then he can proc it throughout the fight. We see usually that the ads need to be interrupted. As you said, it's fortified, so usually the ads are not a super big deal, but you should still interrupt them so you don't get big damage coming in on top of quaking and the AoE that happens at the very end of the boss fight.
GULCH TROTTERS now dealing with a similar pull, of course, on the right side of the screen. We do have that Purg proc on the Blood DK already. We'll have to keep an eye on them. Tirathon now down to 67% on Team Substitute side. As that chain is thrown out with the Warglaives now, this chain is particularly irritating for a lot of players, especially casters and healers, as they will need to well pre-position ahead of the chain to not have to move too much on this boss, while in the meantime, the tank and the melee will kind of play ring around the rosy around that fountain area.
Yeah, and later on in the next phase, we see the I-beam coming out of the boss, so it can be very dangerous with this chain here on the boss fight. If you fall too far behind as a tank and your whole group doesn't move up further, then it can be very dangerous to also dodge the I-beam at the same time.
But you see the Blood Drinker go off from the Blood DK there. Pretty standard pick for most Blood DKs, increasing that single target damage. Tirathon now moving around the outside of that basin in the middle. Ads spawning in, do well to grab aggro from the tank, interrupt the Fell Furies before they reach too many stacks, and explode on the group, of course. While in the meantime, GULCH TROTTERS now move around and are ready to pull the first boss as well, but they're substantially behind at the moment. I mean, 6 death differential, and they've just now pulled the first boss. I mean, this is a huge gap to overcome, Nagura.
Yeah, I mean, they do have their Bloodlust now ready for this boss, but they used it just now. It was a long time already spent in the dungeon without actually using the Bloodlust, and they don't get their sated debuff going on, so they're actually far behind in the Bloodlust timer as well, and they're also behind in enemy forces. They're 4% behind, so it's going to be hard for them to catch up, and it was their map pick as well. Yeah,
so far Team Substitute really looking like they're dominating that pick well, that they chose. They do finish the boss off and move over, so yeah. I got you.
It's not their map. Yeah.
So Team Substitute now moving over. So we do have kind of a 2-pronged attack here, where you will have oftentimes one DPS, as we see that Bop with a Paladin running over to one side to rack up the Imps, as the rest of the group moves over to the left, combining them in front of the Imp Mother here and DPSing them all down as they do give percent, and now chewing through the rest of the health of this Imp Mother in order to unlock access to the elevator, which leads, of course, to everybody's favorite boss downstairs, Inquisitor Tormentrum.
Yeah, slowly but surely, GULCH TROTTERS is getting lower and lower in the bus, so they're catching up a little bit, but yeah, it's going to be difficult for them to get to the time that Team Substitute is on right now.
Tirathon now at 20% for GULCH TROTTERS as they dodge that I-beam, and of course the chain menacingly comes around the side for them. But I mean, Team Substitute is taking quite their time on this Imp Mother right now. Should be dead by now, fortified or not, but taking a fair bit. They do well to kind of grip every Imp that keeps spawning in to make sure that they rack up all the small percentage that they can prior to moving downstairs, which will allow them to avoid maybe 1 or 2 of the hounds that exist down there for the extra percent that they would need.
Yeah, we will probably see the hounds getting pulled to the bus, as we saw most teams in the Jana region last weekend do as well. Gives you extra percentage, and to be fair, the dogs give quite a lot of percentage, considering that they don't really do much as long as they're not Scorchers. Of course, it's Defilers and Scorchers, 2 different kind of dogs. The Scorchers actually explode when they die, and it does quite a bit of damage on fortified, so you gotta be careful. But the Defilers don't really do much as long as you just interrupt their drain, which stuns you.
Yeah, you just have to make sure to interrupt indeed as they erupt to pull. Now, there are 2 kind of strats to this boss. One of them is to opt to fight the boss at the jails that he summons, which happens at 70 and 40%. He will summon one of the random 4 jails in the corners. The other is actually to LOS or line of sight the boss upstairs, as to allow the mobs that he spawns to not be able to cast on you and then run over, and you will then need to kill them and pile them up. But of course, that is not very good for DPS because there's a lot of downtime waiting for the boss and all he has to come in. And Nagura, as you said, of course, they do pull 2 Defilers along with Inquisitor Tormentrum here.
Yeah, we saw Skyland D last time around actually switch up the strat depending on what door the boss opened. We'll see what kind of strat Team Substitute chooses here and see how they're doing.
Tormentum now going to 70%. So as we said, they do opt to go over to that first jail and not wait for them. Now the Warlock is particularly menacing in this group outside of the Annihilator as well. The Warlock, if the seed casts go off, there's a ton of damage that goes in on the group. But also, as you know, you're no stranger to, of course, is a range. The Annihilator will charge the range and drop aggro and also knock up and stun the person that they charge.
We actually saw the Annihilator charge through the Warlock's pet and kill it, unfortunately. So that didn't work out well for the Warlock, but he can just resummon. We see the mage actually blocking here, ice blocking because of the charge.
Because of the charge, but he didn't get very low in the meantime. The tank does, of course, need to be very quickly to snap threat back with either a grip, in this case, a death grip from the DK, or that taunt in the meantime. Tormentum just now reaching that first jail for Gulch Trotters on the right side of the screen, opening the same jail, of course, for both players, as Tormentum getting down to 43% on Team Substitute side, and will be opening up that second jail. Now, some of these jails, of course, are worse than others. Naguro, you know, the Shawling one is probably the easiest one, where you just round them up and make sure you spread out for the debuffs that explode after. So we'll have to see which one they get in just a moment here.
Yeah, there's some very dangerous portals that get open where there's a lot of different mobs that need to be interrupted, and if you don't interrupt, then either there's a lot of AoE damage, like a seed coming out, or throw dynamite. Like, there's a lot of difficult mobs to deal with for sure.
So they do opt to use that AoE grip right away, get these mobs together in the kind of Faceless One area. There is a Scorcher that somehow weasels its way in at the bottom. We're going to have to keep an eye on who let that dog out. In the meantime, Gulch Trotters moving up to LOS, 39%. So it's interesting that on this pack they chose to line of sight, whereas, because with the DK you kind of have that advantage to right away grip everything together, and in their case also get that solar beam down right away. So I'm not really sure why they chose to play it so defensively. They are going to lose a bit of time and damage on that as a result.
Yeah, so we see Team Substitute never chose to do a line of sight strat, which, as you said, is faster with the DK mass grip coming in, and it's just like it's less downtime and gives you more damage, and especially for the, as it's a Warlock and a mage, so it's less time to walk around, because if you're moving, obviously you can't do very much damage if you're a caster.
They do well, though. Inquisitor Tormentum does round up at 15% of Gulch Trotters, but is about to fall over on Team Substitute side, after which we will see them move up to that mini-boss, the Mother, of course, with the 4 Hounds. Now, there are 2 Scorchers and 2 Defilers in this group, so they'll have to deal with both, wanting to make sure that they try to kill them in a staggered fashion, is to not get too much damage explosion on the group, and making sure that not too much damage comes in on the tank in the meantime.
Yeah, we said do have a Warlock here, so in case the passive cleave goes out of hand and the Scorchers are about to die at the same time, then the Warlock can last minute just banish one of the Scorchers so the explosion doesn't come out at the same time. The mini-boss also has an AoE silence where the range needs to stop casting for a second, else they get interrupted, just like pretty much just like quaking.
So it's double quaking on this mob, unfortunately, for them. Both teams, as you can see, in the 85, 86 mid-range around for that trash completed percentage. They will bump up to the low mid-90s after finishing with this pack here. And we'll expect, of course, then to see a lot of skipping after these next 2 bosses. We do have 2 bosses coming back-to-back for both of these groups in just a moment. And whether or not they go to, of course, Glazer or Ash Golem first, oftentimes depends on how the CDs for the groups line up. Sometimes Bloodlust is something to take into consideration for these teams, depending on how long it takes. Wouldn't be surprised, for instance, if Team Substitute actually goes off to Glazer first in order to allow that Bloodlust timer to come off, and then goes over to Ash Golem.
Yeah, for sure. So we see Gulch Trotters actually caught up quite a bit. I feel like they're pretty even now. They actually killed the mini-boss before they killed the other ones. Of course, the death difference is still quite huge, as it's 7 death versus 1 death, so it's a 30 seconds difference.
So we're actually seeing both teams, if my prediction is incorrect, we're seeing both teams run over to Ash Golem in the meantime, our resident Molten Giant that has been frozen in ice here in the Warden's jail. Notable on this fight, of course, is the most notable mechanic, rather, is, of course, the brittle phase in the meantime, where they will have to freeze the giant with the statues and get a 20-second DPS uptime for 20% increased damage taken on the giant.
So we actually see them pop Bloodlust here on this boss, as the Bloodlust timing was a little bit wrong, as it was the mage that had the debuff, but the rest of the group didn't, as the mage is a legendary that makes him be able to use Bloodlust more often, so we had a small display error there. They used their Bloodlust for Ash Golem here. The other team, Gulch Trotters, does not have their Bloodlust ready, so they're probably going to use it for Glazer afterwards.
Right, you are. Indeed. So we do have the shattering of the ice on both teams in just a moment. They will likely have to play a double brittle phase. Maybe. It depends how much single target they can pump up during that brittle phase, but once he restarts his phase 1 here and fires things up again, he will spawn some mobs around the area. If any of those mobs, the small fire elementals, come in contact with some of the fire on the ground, it will cause them to explode for a substantial amount of damage on the group. Now, of course, players can also run in and absorb these zones by themselves by pre-MSing, pre-immuning, or just absorbing the damage themselves to make sure that they intercept them and the ads don't absorb them. Unfortunately, one of the embers falls right on top of one of those zones, though.
Yeah, so the detonate, as we just saw go off on GULCH TROTTERS, does not do too much damage on level 22 when it is 45. So some teams choose to just not absorb the zones on the floor. It obviously costs a little bit of damage if someone has to walk around and absorb everything, even for the healer, as he could be DPSing otherwise.
GULCH TROTTERS now entering their second brittle phase, cold as ice and willing to sacrifice. Ash Golem going down in a moment. They will be heading up the stairs very promptly after this to head over to Glazer, the eyeball boss. But you know, Nagura, team substitute really not very far behind at this moment. 8%. They'll be entering their... have they entered the second brittle phase or not? Oh, there it is right now, exactly. So they will be finishing it off promptly here as well, and following suit to GULCH TROTTERS, needing to go over to Glazer. Both teams, of course, need to kill Glazer in order to get access to the final boss.
Yeah, one interesting thing we just saw come out of Team GULCH TROTTERS, they did not use a second potion during the boss fight, so they're able to use a nether walk potion to get faster to Glazer, as it is a pretty long run to the boss. And we see also that Team Substitute is on the way as well to the second boss. And as we mentioned earlier, Team GULCH TROTTERS still actually 1 minute cooldown on that Bloodlust, so it might not be ready for the first focus phase.
No, but they should probably have it available for Cardona if they choose to save it, obviously. Glazer will, of course, at the start of the fight, have about a 40-second uptime on where you can DPS him. You will want to redirect those blue orbs flying around the room that he summons 4 at a time. Once they hit one of the walls, it will target the closest player to them and redirect in that direction, so the player can actually pre-position themselves well to make sure that those orbs hit the boss as opposed to one of the players. As we see here, Glazer now entering that immunity phase where that beam must be intelligently redirected by the players using the statues. And Nagura, you want to make sure that you kill that pulsing evil statue before the laser hits it, otherwise it will kill the group.
Yeah, exactly. And once the laser actually hits the boss, his focus phase is over, and he actually gets a damage increase on him for a couple of seconds for 100%, which is they do not have their Bloodlust ready, unfortunately. Still 10 seconds on the timer. So they're still going to kill the boss, though, as we see an insane amount of damage coming out of the Windwalker here. And the other group is just, seems Team Substitute is in the focus phase as well. And yeah, they're just very slightly behind.
It is worth noting that even if they had Bloodlust available, perhaps it wouldn't have been the best use. I think there would have wasted some of it. By the time they were done with that 100% damage burst phase on Glazer, the boss was already around 22-23%, so they're able to clean that up well, and now we'll head over and likely skip that Jailer coming up in just a moment. Now, they don't have access, of course, to a Rogue, and I doubt they're going to want to use their Invis Pod, so I'm probably seeing that the tank is going to do the whole pull to the side thing here, sacrifice themselves while the rest of the team runs over. We are seeing the Blood Deacon for GULCH TROTTERS do just that. The Jailer gets pulled to the side, the other 4 will run by safely, and of course, res the poor tank who has sacrificed himself heroically on the other side of the Jailer.
I actually want to see what exactly they're doing here. I'm not sure if it was a miscalculation when it comes to enemy forces, because both teams are actually in 98 and 99%, and I'm not sure how they will be able to skip the 4 spiders here, as they have to kill the last spirit, which will give them the last percentage, but I'm not sure how they will skip the 4 spiders, and if they're not, then they killed a little bit too much trash.
It's possible. I mean, we did see for a couple, or for at least for Team Substitute, that they had that extra, Scorcher come in during the fight with Inquisitor Tormentor, so perhaps that was not intended. We'll see in a moment here just how they intend to deal with these 4 spiders, and they intend to deal with them by killing them very promptly. So you're absolutely right. They did overpull some trash. After this, though, we will see that typical skip where they will invis an avalanche potion and safely go down beyond the next set of spiders over towards the gate leading to Cardona. Team Substitute now just going down in the elevator.
Yeah, we saw the skip here coming out of the mage, not as usual with the tank. I'm not... Oh, okay, so we saw the tank actually get dressed weirdly or fell through the elevator and died, unfortunately. So their pull is going to be slightly delayed as they have to wait for the tank to be rest up and actually get the light. I don't know why no one else is getting the light for the tank here. I feel like that would be a little bit of a time save.
That is unfortunately a tank-only job as Pwned...
Oh, the quaking.
As Pwned... Oh no, the quaking interrupts them as well. Pwned unfortunately falling in love with the elevator a bit too heavily and falling to his death in the meantime. They do have to actually get the failure detection pilot on him. He does res. They do grab the light in the meantime. Takes a quick eat before they pull the final 4 spiders. GULCH TROTTERS over on the right side has now pulled that final spirit along with the Broodmother, which you just effectively cleave them down anyways. Your invis runs out by the time you get to the Broodmother either way. The door has opened, and we'll expect one of the players to likely run over to Cardona, start that RP as the other players finish up the last mob.
Yeah, this is actually going to be really close because we have a pretty big death difference. It's 3 deaths for Team Substitute to 8 deaths from Team GULCH TROTTERS. So it is a 25 seconds difference. As we see Team Substitute is behind though, especially because the tank death that we saw and the quaking interrupt. We actually see the monk die here for Team GULCH TROTTERS. Not sure what exactly happened. Maybe he died at the very end.
Battle res there too, I think. I mean.
Oh yeah, they did. Now they have 0 battle rests. Yeah, they did.
I'm sure they used the battle res there. I think they would have been free to clean it up. Nonetheless, Cordana now being pulled for GULCH TROTTERS. We see that Bloodlust go off as they start to pump as much damage. Now, she does kind of have 3 phases to her. One at 75%. She will disappear into the darkness of the platform. The players will be stripped of the light, and she will spawn a shadow of herself that can be stunned in order not to get some of that cleave damage on the group. Once that shadow is killed, it will reveal the light, and the players can then use the light to expose Cordana yet again. And then, of course, Nagura at 40%, we have those walls come up.
Yeah, so the walls come up 40%, she gets immune and flies in the air, and then the person with the light has to reveal the walls, else you're not able to see them. Usually it's not a big deal for teams to dodge them, as it is not the most difficult mechanic in the whole dungeon, but sometimes it can be risky, especially if you stand on the very edges of the room and the wall spawns on top of you, so you gotta be a little bit smart when you move around with the light.
And it's important, of course, the person with the light ahead of time cleaning up some of those void pools on the ground as to make sure that they can return to the group for that wall phase and expose the wall as well so that nobody's caught in too terrible of a position. Cordana now reaching that 40% mark. She will be immune for 40 seconds while the players find the gaps in the wall, running over as a group in the meantime. Looks like they're overcommitting to that first wall. Oftentimes, players like to actually hover in the middle of one of the sides after they see the first gap come so they can go through the second wall right away. Nonetheless, it doesn't really matter in the meantime. As long as you avoid the wall properly, the Cordana can't be damaged anyway. So as long as no players die, this should be good to go.
One thing to note is that they actually used their Bloodlust on the pull of the boss. A lot of teams save their Bloodlust for the second phase when the walls are over, because she does disappear at the very start and the ad spawns, and it's a little bit of downtime. So most teams opt to use the Bloodlust in the second phase, but not Team GULCH TROTTERS.
Now we're going to have a really hairy situation here at the end. Of course, I don't know much about that, but we will have a situation here where there will be a 30-second timer as soon as Cordana dies. 2 deaths coming up. Luckily, they do have 2 battle reses, but 2 deaths coming up for Team Substitute right now. We'll have to get those reses up. As I say that, of course, the 2 deaths happen. Now it will be a 20-second timer where Team Substitute will have only 20 seconds to make up and kill Cordana from the moment Cordana falls for GULCH TROTTERS in order to take this map. So it's going to be pretty close, and those 2 deaths certainly didn't help.
Yeah, so they're still pretty far behind in percentage as well, 61%, while the other team, GULCH TROTTERS, is actually about to kill the boss just now. So it's going to be almost impossible for them to catch up at this point.
It's actually literally impossible because that transition phase is 40 seconds long. So it looks like we are going to have a 2-0 sweep from GULCH TROTTERS.
Comeback in that instance. The first boss was taken down over a minute faster by, Team Substitute, right? They even had a full wipe on GULCH TROTTERS in the start of that one. We said the front end of the instance is going to be the hard part, but they just had such a phenomenal, they had really high DPS, they had a phenomenal run from there, and they were able to pull it back, Nagura.
Yeah, it was at the very start, as we saw this wipe come out of them, it looked really bad for them as the other team was so much faster, but I don't know, they just somehow managed to do a really clean run from there. They did not tilt, they did not get in a bad space, and they managed to pull themselves together and do a clean run, and work for them.
Yeah, it really did work out for them. And one thing, we don't have Jack on the desk right now, but one thing I do want to highlight is that both these Holy Paladins, and therefore all the Holy Paladins we've seen out of ANZ thus far, not out of Korea, but out of the 3 ANZ teams, have just been doing so much damage on these bosses. They really have been emphasizing that kind of extra little... It's not the most significant thing, but it definitely does add up when you're racing at this level.
Yeah, this is where a lot of that melodious synergy comes in with the Blood DK and trusting your players and showing that you're really practiced. The Blood DK can add some support with those to those teams, of course, with consumption, leech 15 second, up every 45 seconds. The tank can take care of themselves, so the healer really needs to trust and also judge well in that situation when it's okay to DPS. And, as we saw in the previous series, Jack called that out as well. As Zeros did get caught out on Shade of Xavia's, but performed really well on the next map. So as long as the healers are trusting of the group and of the tank and know when it's right to heal and do damage, then they can, especially Holy Paladins can get a ton of damage out, and it really shows in the timers for these teams.
Yeah, we're seeing some pretty standard compositions coming out here. I'm very interested to see that, quite often we're seeing the Windwalker monks, we're seeing these Havoc Demon Hunters, which are the 2 things we talked about a little bit last weekend, but especially these 3rd DPSs, we've seen now a Fire Mage, we've seen a couple of Affliction Warlocks, a Moonkin, actually 2 Moonkins as well. It's been interesting to see how they're bringing out these range DPS. It's been very different per team.
Yeah, definitely. I love this APAC region already. Yes, there's 2 Moonkins already, so I'm in love with this region already. And yeah, the Moonkins have been doing really great so far. And as you said, like the compositions have been quite a bit different to the China region. A lot of Windwalkers. I think every group so far had a Windwalker in them, and the Windwalkers obviously have been doing a lot of damage.
Yeah, I mean, they have, right? Like, I wanted to show off that the Moonkin had been doing quite a lot, but it wasn't quite enough for me to do it. But we are, therefore, going to have our second series of the day out the way. GULCH TROTTERS taking that one 2-0. They're on their high horse, and they will advance to the upper bracket to face Free Marcy later today. That's definitely going to be one to watch out for. Next, we're going to have the returning Korean team, Gurumo, going up against another team that did very well in the time trial, Psy. Don't go anywhere. The MDI will be right back after this.